Welcome back. All right, talked about the West. Now we're going to talk about the East. As again, trade deadline is March the 8th, and we're going to be doing a lot of discussions on who's going to move and who's not. But I just look at the UFAs and the RFAs because once you get into everybody else who might get traded, basically you can just fill the board with names and it just becomes total chaos. So I'm trying to keep this simple. We'll start off with Montreal again. Teams in a random order, even more random in this one than the last one. The UFAs for Montreal are Monahan, Stevens, Pearson, and Weidman. Pearson, of course, injured currently. Weidman, I believe, as well. As I don't think Weidman's played this year. Stevens has come up, played all right, and Monahan's been pretty good. So the question becomes, do you keep Monahan? Do you trade Monahan? And it really may very well depend on how the team plays from here. They're 4 points out of the playoffs. So it depends on whether Hughes wants to say, you know what, we're going to lean into the fact that we're still in the rebuild, or you know what, we might as well go for it and see if we can get ourselves into the playoffs. So their RFA list, Ullinen, who's been good, and I saw him getting thrown up. I think he was on the first line by the end of their last game there, and I don't blame them for putting him higher up in the lineup. When they're looking for energy, Ullinen's a good guy to get that from. Lindstrom, who's been solid, and Barron, who's an excellent young defenseman. We'll see how many years they give Barron and what they see in him. Their cap space currently shows us $2,475,000. So there's some cap space there. And again, they're 4 points out of the playoffs, so Montreal's going to be fun to watch. Buffalo. So I'm wearing Buffalo, so I wore Seattle in the other one because I felt like Seattle was the team that was probably the most disappointing of the ones out west. I'm wearing Buffalo because probably the most disappointing in the East. We would not have envisioned them selling, but here we are. They're 7 points out of the playoffs. Their UFA list, Olofsson, I think would be available. Opozo, he's the captain. I don't think he's going anywhere. Jost, Gergensons, I don't think Gergensons is going anywhere either. Robinson, who they just picked up not too long back. Eric Johnson and Comrie. Eric Johnson, I think, would probably be available at the deadline should they remain far enough out of the playoffs that they decide they're going to sell. I would think teams would be interested in Johnson for his experience and for his Stanley Cup ring as well. Then there's their RFA list. Middlestad, who's had a very good year. How much is that worth and for how long? Krebs, he's a good young player. Yoki Harju, good young defenseman. Luukkonen, good young goaltender. So there's a lot of good young players here. And then you have Bryson and Stillman, who are both on the injured list, but they're RFAs next summer as well. Their cap space, there's a lot of it. $12,308,445. So Buffalo has cap space. Yes, Middlestad's going to get a raise. Luukkonen is going to get a raise over what he's making. But there's still a lot of cap space here. So they can get creative at the deadline, and if they want, they can bring somebody in. But yeah, Buffalo, of course, was rumored to be a potential destination for Patrick Kane. That did not work out. I don't think they'd be any closer to the playoffs if they had signed Kane. So, New Jersey, their UFA list, Toffoli, Tierney, Miller, Brendan Smith, and Nosek. Now, will the New Jersey Devils be in buying mood? I think they're already in a buying mood when it comes to a goaltender. But again, Toffoli's on an expiring contract. If you find yourself still 3 points out of the playoffs at the deadline, what do you do, right? RFAs, McLeod, Mercer, and Schmid. Mercer's been good. I don't know if he's going to get a huge raise this year. I don't think so. But that being said, it depends on whether they go with a short-term bridge deal or a long-term deal for Mercer. And again, Schmid, they envision him as the future starter, so it'll be interesting to see what he gets. The cap space, $1,500,560. And again, they're 3 points out of the playoffs. So New Jersey will have some decisions to make. I assume they'll be buying at the deadline because this is a team that can and showed last year. They have that ability to perform well in the playoffs and go on nice little runs. So New Jersey is one that I think could end up really jump-starting the trade deadline, much like the Islanders did last year. Islanders are down here. The Islanders last year jump-started it with the Horvat deal, and I could see New Jersey doing that with an acquisition or a trade of some sort where maybe it's a hockey trade. Because, again, they only have the $1.5 million in cap space, so maybe you make a hockey trade where it's dollar out, dollar in. Boston. Fascinating team, Boston. They are first in the Atlantic. However, they've been middling over their last 10. They're 4-3-3, so only 4 wins in their last 10. And their UFA list is interesting. DeBrusk, who it feels like with Jake DeBrusk, you have feast or famine, and right now it's kind of a famine thing. And I don't know how much longer he'll be a Bruin. Do they re-sign him? Do you keep him? James Van Riemsdyk, who was just in on a 1-year deal. Same with Heinen. Grzelcyk, I don't think has had a great year, but he's been dealing with injuries as well. What is he worth? Shattenkirk, Forbert, and of course Lucic, who's only played the 4 games. He's currently, of course, dealing with criminal proceedings and everything. Don't expect him back with the Bruins, but there are some interesting decisions for this team to make once we get to the trade deadline. Their RFA list is dominated by Jeremy Swayman, who has been a dominant goaltender. You have Mitchell, you have Steen, and you have Boquist on the list as well. So nobody else is going to get a big raise, but yeah, Swayman is going to get paid, and I think it should be a long-term deal. I think Swayman's earned it. The cap space for Boston, $3,782,500. A lot of discussions about whether or not they're going to be in on Elias Lindholm. That is very well possible, but we'll see, right? They're, again, first in the Atlantic. They're 4 points ahead of both Toronto and Florida. Toronto, definitely in the process of catching up to them. Toronto is 5-2-3 in their last 10, so they have 13 points in their last 10. Boston has 11 points in their last 10. Whereas for Florida, they're 5-5. They have 10 points in their last 10. So the 3 teams at the top of the Atlantic, interesting to say the least. Then you have Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa Bay's heated up recently, so while they're the number 2 wild card, they are only 1 point behind Florida. So maybe Tampa Bay jumps into a top 3 spot after all. Their UFA list is, of course, dominated by Stamkos. Does Stamkos stay? How much does he get? Questions we want answers to. The team not, close to a deal with him at this point, but I still think it happens. I'd be very surprised if Stamkos leaves. Mott, Watson, DeHaan, Barré-Boulet, Fleury, and Brent Seabrook's contract comes to an end this coming summer. So Brent Seabrook can officially be retired this coming summer. Your restricted free agents, Koepke, Logan Brown. There's nobody here who's going to make a ton of extra money. The team does not have cap space, $775,000 according to Cap Friendly. So again, they're the number 2 wild card. They're tied with Washington, and they are 1 point back of Florida in the overall standings. The Atlantic Division, we're not set as to who the top 3 are going to be as of yet. And for Tampa Bay, who are 7-3 in their last 10, they're catching up to the teams in front of them. Pittsburgh, they have an interesting UFA list because are the Pittsburgh Penguins going to sell? If the Pittsburgh Penguins can't get closer to the 5 points out that they are right now, what do you do at the deadline if you're Kyle Dubas? Not an easily answered question. Their UFAs, Jake Guentzel. Guentzel's going to get paid. Guentzel's a goal scorer in a league where goal scorers make a lot of money, right? Carter hasn't had a great year. This may very well be his final season. So do you try to rent him out at the deadline if that's the case? Harkins, Hinostroza, Zahorna, depth forwards, Ruedel, depth defenseman, and Nedeljkovic in net. So Guentzel's the big question mark here. We'll see if he's still a Penguin. I would think he will be. I think that there'll be some feedback from Malkin, Crosby, and others who are in that leadership group that will be taken into consideration. I don't see Guentzel going anywhere. Then on the RFA front, you have P.O. Joseph. You have Puustinen as well, who's looked good in his call-up. Cap space, they have $3,650,000 in cap space, and again, they're 5 points out of a playoff spot. Philadelphia, the biggest surprise in the positive. Normally, when I use the gritty magnets, it's because things are goofy in Philadelphia, but it's goofy good right now in Philadelphia. Their UFA list, Sean Walker, who I think has been a good addition for them. Mark Stahl, no points, but it's Mark Stahl. You get 1 or 2 points, you're happy. I think he has 1 assist, 2 assists, one assist so far this year. Sealer, who is, I think, playing pretty well for them too. So they've had a better blue line than expected, all 3 of those defensemen. Restricted free agents, Carter Hart is due this coming summer. So what's Hart getting for how long? And with all the rumors last summer about Hart being traded, those rumors have all died off as expected when a team does better than expected. You have Zamula on the blue line, and then you have Tippett, Paling, and Brink up front. Bobby Brink's been excellent. I would think at least a 3 or 4 year deal. I don't know if you want to go bridge deal there because I think the sky's the limit. And then with Tippett, probably 3-4 year deal. Paling, probably a 1 or 2 year deal. But with their cap space being $3,204,383, there's some space there if they want to make a move. They are 3rd in the Metro, 1 point behind the New York Islanders. So the Flyers, very surprisingly good and a solid-looking team. When I'm watching them play now, I'm not thinking, well, they're batting above where they should be, and it's going to come down to they're playing well. Columbus is going to be interesting. Their UFA list is short. Gauntz, who's a call-up, of course. Martin, who is now that number 3 goaltender, and there's been rumors about whether or not he might get moved now that Tarasov is back. Roslovic, who's been injured, but there's been a lot of rumors with Roslovic too on what his status is with the team. If Roslovic's healthy by deadline and he's okay with being traded out and they want to move him, I would think there'll be teams that are interested. The restricted free agent list is interesting because you got Marchenko, who's been, I think, their most consistent forward throughout the season thus far. Sillinger, Bemstrom, Chinikov, who's been very good on that same line with Marchenko, Bean, and Blankenberg on the blue line. So there's some young guys there, some players that do need to have decent extensions, and if you're Columbus, you got to be smart about it. Their cap space, $4,253,957 and they're 11 points out of the playoffs. So for Columbus, playoffs, very, very highly unlikely. You're 11 points out. We're about halfway through the season. The odds of making up that distance, it just becomes too much of a tall task. So then the question becomes, if you're the general manager, do you just full on say, we're going to sell off guys who are UFAs, and maybe you're going to make other guys available too, because those 3 UFAs don't really move the needle at all. I don't think there's a market for Gauntz. I like Gauntz, but I would understand there isn't. Martin, I think there's more of a market now than there was when the Canucks waived him before the season got started. And Roslovic, I think there'll be a market, but let me know your thoughts. The New York Rangers, their UFA list, Blake Wheeler, who of course came in on a 1-year deal. Bonino, Tyler Pitlick, Brodzinski, Gustafsson, and Quick. So there's nobody here that the Rangers, if they were to leave at the end of this season, that Rangers fans or the Rangers would be necessarily panicked with. Although Jonathan Quick's been very good at this point in his career too. How much longer is he going to play before he says, yeah, no, I'm going to hang him up? Then the restricted free agent list, you got Kakko, Lindgren, and Schneider. Lindgren is going to be interesting to watch. Lindgren's a very good defensive defenseman. Shot blocker, some toughness, and if he's injured and not in a game, it means he's got a limb hanging off or something, because I have remarked many times over about how he gets hurt and you watch him leave a game and you're like, he's not coming back, and he comes right back. He maybe misses the shift. Kakko, on the other hand, is this Kakko's last year with the Rangers? Do they maybe move him if he's still not advancing as an offensive forward? And Schneider's going to get paid too. He's a very good, solid defenseman for them. Cap space, $6,537,500. They are first in the Metro, 6 points clear of the New York Islanders. So some nice breathing room for them atop the division. The Florida Panthers, their UFA list is long. It's an extensive list. Cousins, Lawrence, Stenlund, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who of course came over from the Canucks. I think he's done a good job of having a bounce-back year for Florida. Lomberg, Montour, very good since his return as well. Forsling. So basically, if it's a defenseman, they might be up. Kulikov, and then you've got Stolars, and of course the big name, Reinhart. Reinhart having an amazing career year, which has to be frustrating for a GM, because you're watching this guy have a career year. You're seeing his payday get a little bit bigger and bigger with every passing game. And on some level, you have to think he's playing great right now, but do we expect that going forward? Is he going to be that forward for the rest of his career? Or will we sign him to an 8-year extension and next year he has a letdown, right? So that has to be where the thought process is, at least at some level. So the restricted free agent list, Mahura, Lundell, and Gadjevich. So nobody there is going to get a big raise. Lundell, it'll be interesting to see what he gets. Cap space, $2,205,673. They are third in the Atlantic. Not that far ahead of Tampa, of course, but they're tied with Toronto and they're 4 points back of Boston. So those top 4 in the Atlantic, pretty close. Could finish in any order. Detroit, who would like to get back into, playoff discussions and considerations, and they're not that far out. 3 points isn't that big a deal, but they need to turn it around. Now, their UFA list is interesting. You have Perron. You have Kane. I would not be surprised to see this be Kane's last season. I wouldn't be surprised to see this end up being Perron's last season. So do you use that as like a rallying cry to get this team into the playoffs and get those guys another cup? Perron, trying to think, yeah, he has the cup from St. Louis, right? He missed the cup in Vegas, I'm pretty sure, but he got the cup in St. Louis, I believe. And Kane, of course, has some cups from when he was in Chicago. Then you got Sprong, who's been very good. Fisher. Gostisbehere, who's had a good year for Detroit as well. Reimer and Hutchison also on there. Hutchinson just signed, and again, just 1 year, rest of the year kind of thing. And so with Detroit's 3 goaltender situation, once Lyon and Husso are available, well, who do you keep? And with the fact that Reimer's on an expiring contract, does he become the odd man out? Then your RFA list, you've got Seider. So Moritz Seider believers are going to say he deserves a certain amount, and we'll see whether or not he gets as much as he might want and what that's going to look like, what Seider's contract's going to look like. Does it end up being in a similar range as, say, Jake Sanderson's, right? Does he end up with a similar contract as that? Rasmussen, Raymond's had a very good run after a slow start. And Veleno, I think, has been solid for them as well. So there's some young guys here they have to make decisions on this summer. I trust Yzerman. I still trust the Yzer plan. Their cap space, a little over $4 million. $4,032,144. And again, they're 3 points out of the playoffs. I don't think it's as bad in Detroit as their 2-7-1 record over their last 10 might state. But I do understand some of the negativity I see around the Wings at this point. Okay, are we just going to be a playoff team now feeling? I understand. I get it. Which brings me to Ottawa, where feeling's kind of sort of the same, and yet they're 15 points out of a playoff spot. Yeah, there's some games in hand on teams they're chasing, but 15 points is still 15 points. Their UFA list is short. It's Tarasenko, Kubalik, and Chartier. Tarasenko's been good, so if he decides to come back for another year, I don't think fans or management are going to mind. Kubalik, a little bit up and down. Chartier's a fourth liner. And then your restricted free agents, Kelly and Brandstrom. There's been discussions about whether or not Brandstrom's going to stay in Ottawa long term. And of course, for cap space, they have some. They have $7,225,000 in cap space. But again, 15 points out of the playoffs. Their coaches changed. Their GM's changed. They have the new owner. It just really feels like there's going to be some kind of a reset with the Ottawa organization going forward. And I have no idea if that reset's going to be geared towards let's beef up this lineup and see if we can make a push, or selling off assets and saying, all right, we'll try to get things started for next year, which would be upsetting for Ottawa fans. Even if they understand it, still, this is supposed to be the era of unparalleled success for the Ottawa Senators. It has not happened. Washington, their UFA list, they have Mantha, Aube-Kubel, Edmondson, and Pacioretty. Pacioretty, of course, has yet to make his season debut, but it doesn't sound like it's that far off. Their restricted free agents, Sandin, who is, I think, a solid pickup from Toronto, McMichael, who's had a good year. Protas has been good. Phillips had a good start offensively. He's fallen off a bit there. And Malenstein, who I think gives them a good effort every night. There's nobody who's going to get a big money contract in July. But I do like the potential with Protas, with McMichael, and on some level, Malenstein as well. You might have some late bloomers in Washington. And then when we get into the cap space argument, which means I have to write the number on the board, it's $8,885,000 in cap space for Washington. So the Caps have some cap to cap off their team with new caps. I'll stop. Sorry. Yeah, they're the number one wild card, surprisingly, and they're only 1 point behind Philadelphia, and they're tied with Tampa Bay in those wild card spots. So Washington's in good shape. Do they add? They have the cap space to add. So who do you add and where? Then we look at the Islanders, their UFA list. You have Clutterbuck, you have Martin, you have Riley, Bortuzzo, Aho. Nobody there is going to get a huge raise. So some cost certainty going forward, I would think, for them. Restricted free agents, just two, Wahlstrom and Holmstrom. Holmstrom's been very good this year. Wahlstrom, another kind of frustrating back and forth. I don't know if Wahlstrom ends up being an Islander long term. I don't get the feeling that that's necessarily going to be the case. But their cap space, $3.8 million exactly. They're second in the Metro Division, 6 points back of the New York Rangers, 1 point ahead of the Philadelphia Flyers. And again, regardless of how they're getting their points, they're getting them. They're in a playoff spot. And it still feels like the Islanders haven't played their best hockey yet. So that's the bad news for the rest of the East, is it feels like the Islanders are just getting their feet wet and starting to get comfortable. Toronto, at least because they've been playing better lately than they were earlier in the season. Toronto is going to be the place to watch. And again, people get tired of, it's Toronto coverage. I get it. I totally do. But there's a lot of reason to talk about Toronto. We start with William Nylander. He is going to get paid this summer. And whenever I hear, well, he's just having the one good year, these are people I know haven't necessarily paid a lot of attention to Nylander or pay into the feed into the narrative that, well, he's not good in the playoffs. And I disagree with that assessment. I think Nylander has not necessarily been the problem for Toronto in the playoffs. There are various things with Toronto's playoff performances, but he's got to get paid. Bertuzzi and Domi both came in on one-year deals. I don't know if they're going to be Leafs beyond this season. Of the two, Domi's, I think, the more likely to stay. Just feels like a more natural fit than Bertuzzi, but we'll see. Bobby McMahon is popular with Leaf fans, rightfully so. He's a UFA this coming summer. Brody, Lagesson on the blue line, and then you got Samsonov and Jones. Yep, both Samsonov and Jones are on expiring contracts. Then you've got Muzzin, Murray, Klingberg, and Giordano, all 4 on LTIR. So this is why when you mention they have cap space, people raise their fists and they're cheating the system, they're over the cap. There's a lot of teams on the board here that I'm showing with cap space that are using LTIR to get there. And there's lots of discussion about LTIR right now and what the NHL should do. The NHL doesn't really care, I don't think, but I get why people get mad at it. But they have $1,634,999 in cap space according to Cap Friendly, and I appreciate they didn't round up. They're second in the Atlantic, so they're tied with Florida. They are 4 points back of the Boston Bruins for that spot. But yeah, Toronto, if you don't want to hear about Toronto, I got bad news because we're going to hear a lot about Toronto because they also have to sign RFAs, Robertson, Gregor, Liljegren, and Benoit. So if Benoit and Gregor are ones that we can say, well, they'll get like league minimum. How much does Robertson get? Does he get paid, just for a 1-year deal? Is it going to be 2? And Liljegren, what do you give Liljegren? Where do you envision him? And how do you pay him going forward? Or is it just going to be a bridge deal as well? And then we finish things off with the Carolina Hurricanes. Their UFA list is fascinating. First, you have Teuvo Teravainen, who would be a very popular topic on July 1st if we got there. And with the fact the Canes are outside of a playoff spot right now, what do you do? So if they stay 1 point below or just barely in, or what do you do at the deadline? And do you sign all these guys long-term going forward? Don Waddell will be one to watch. You have Martinook, you have Lemieux, you have Nason, and then on the blue line you have Shea. Shea's going to be worth a lot of money. He's putting up a lot of points. He might be their best defenseman, who's not named Slavin right now. Pesce, D'Angelo are there as well. There's been a lot of talk about Pesce maybe being traded. Still hasn't happened yet. And so he needs a new contract or to get shipped. And again, D'Angelo, there's been rumors about him being on the block. Nothing's happened yet. Chatfield, they're going to want to keep Chatfield. And I would think that Don Waddell, of the names on this board, would at least be sitting down talking to Chatfield's agent if possible. Because Chatfield shouldn't be overly expensive at this point. And then you have Antti Ranta. So Ranta, whose numbers have been not great, he does have a motivator in that he's on an expiring contract. And so we'll see if that does improve his performance going forward or not. They're restricted free agents. You have Jarvis, Necas, and Drury. Necas having a bit of a down year compared to what was expected. I think Jarvis has been good, and I like Jack Drury. Their cap space right now, $3,035,582, and again, they are 1 point out of a playoff spot. There's going to be at least one, if not 2, or maybe even 3 teams that are good, that we look at and say this team should be a playoff team, could be a playoff team, who will miss. The East, it's definitely going to be some good teams that miss. In the West, it feels like that may not be the case, but by the end of the year, that could change. But let me know your thoughts as to who you think will be the buyers and sellers once we get to the trade deadline. Again, that's March the 8th. And again, the team that jumps out and starts that trade deadline market sets the market. And so they may very well make what could end up being the best trade by setting the market. Or maybe they end up looking back later and saying, oh, this can be a mistake. So who sets the market? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.